The first thing Lyra Sterling did every morning was count the tiles on the ceiling. 47. Always 47. No matter how many times she recounted, no matter which corner she started from. She discovered this habit exactly 3 weeks ago. On the first morning she woke up in the Iron and Ivy Studios loft, staring up at the exposed concrete above her with the particular hollow alertness of someone who has not truly slept. 47 industrial ceiling tiles, each one a small gray square, each one blameless and indifferent. She had memorized the crack that ran between tiles 22 and 23. She had noted the water stain near tile 38 that looked, if she tilted her head precisely 40 degrees to the left, like the silhouette of a heron in flight. She was 31 years old, the recipient of 2 regional illustration awards and 1 very sincere letter of commendation from the Pacific Northwest Botanical Society, and she had spent the last 21 mornings counting ceiling tiles to avoid thinking about the woman sleeping behind the Japanese partition screen on the other side of the loft. If you've ever loved someone you couldn't let yourself look at, or if you simply believe in stories that are true, like this video and subscribe to the channel. This one's for you. The loft was not supposed to be this intimate. That was the thing Lyra kept returning to as she finally sat up, swinging her legs over the edge of the daybed that had become her de facto bedroom in the eastern corner of the studio. When Marcus Chen, their mutual contact, the project coordinator for the Halcyon Botanical Garden Commission, had presented the arrangement with the cheerful efficiency of a man who did not understand what he was asking, the word he'd used was practical. "It's practical," he'd said, spreading his hands over the mock-up of the building plans as if practicality were a gift he was personally bestowing. The commission requires collaborative on-site design integration. The loft has everything. Drafting tables, natural light, a kitchen. It's 3 months, maybe 4. You're both professionals. Lyra had looked at the floor plan he'd slid across the conference table. She had looked at the name printed in the collaborator field. Livia Knightwood, Principal Architect, Knightwood plus Reeve Design, Paris. She had said, "Of course, that sounds completely fine." She had said this while her heart performed something that wasn't quite a somersault and wasn't quite a seizure, but lived in the uncomfortable territory between the two. Marcus had not noticed. Marcus, bless his project management soul, never noticed anything that couldn't be entered into a spreadsheet. The Iron and Ivy Studios occupied the top floor of a converted textile warehouse in Seattle's Soto district, sandwiched between a ceramics collective and a recording studio, whose bass lines Lyra could feel in her molars on Friday nights. The building had been a garment factory in the 1940s, which meant the bones were honest. Raw concrete floors, steel columns painted the particular shade of deep green that Lyra privately thought of as industrial moss, and windows. So many windows. They ran floor to ceiling along the northern wall, each pane divided by iron muntins into a grid of rectangles that the Seattle sky filled with a constantly shifting repertoire of grays. Dove gray, pewter gray, the pale silver gray of oyster shells, the deep charcoal gray of approaching weather. It was never dark exactly, even in the rain. The light diffused through the clouds and came in sideways, cool and even, the kind of light that botanical illustrators and architects and anyone who worked with precise lines and subtle gradations practically dreamed about. Lyra had recognized the quality of it on her first afternoon here and had felt, despite everything, a complicated gratitude. She had arranged her workspace on the eastern side of the loft with the methodical care of someone building a small, defensible territory. Her drafting table faced the windows at a slight angle. To her left, a rolling cart held her inks, the Rohrer and Klingner and the Winsor and Newton, organized not by color but by the frequency with which she reached for them, a system that made sense to no one but her. Behind her, 3 wire shelving units held her reference specimens, living plants in clay pots that she watered every Tuesday and Saturday without exception, glass-fronted boxes containing pressed flowers from her personal collection, and 3 shelves of botanical reference books so thoroughly annotated in pencil that they had begun to look like a second text was growing inside the original. On the western side of the loft, Livia's workspace looked, by contrast, like the headquarters of a very elegant military operation. 2 large monitors displayed architectural software in permanent rotation. A light table held overlapping layers of technical drawings. 3 scale models occupied a separate table, each one under a small glass dome, each one representing a different proposed section of the Halcyon Gardens main pavilion. Everything was calibrated. Everything was deliberate. The pencils were parallel. The coffee mug sat exactly to the right of the keyboard, never anywhere else. Between their 2 territories, approximately 22 feet of open loft floor, the shared kitchen counter, and a quantity of unspoken history that Lyra estimated, on her more melodramatic mornings, could fill the Columbia River. Today was the 22nd morning. Lyra pulled her hair back with a clip she found on the daybed frame, not bothering to check whether it was neat. She was not a vain person in the mornings or in the evenings, or particularly in between. Her appearance functioned less as a statement and more as a daily negotiation between what she intended and what her body had done overnight. Her hair, which was the dark reddish-brown of old mahogany when the light hit it, and simply dark when it didn't, had its own opinions about direction. Her hands were already ink-stained before she'd touched a pen today. This was simply their default state, a fact she had long since accepted the way one accepts any unchangeable geography. She put the kettle on and stood at the kitchen counter, looking out the north windows at the sky doing its gray business over the city. The Space Needle was barely visible through the low clouds, just a ghost of a needle, and the water of Elliott Bay was the color of hammered pewter. A container ship moved across it with impossible slowness, the way things always seem to move when observed from a great height and distance, patient and implacable, indifferent to the smallness of everything watching from shore. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of the partition screen sliding open. She did not turn around. This was the thing she had developed over 3 weeks, a comprehensive, carefully maintained policy of not turning around. She could track Livia's morning routine entirely by sound now, the way a naturalist catalogues the behavior of an animal she is forbidden to observe directly. The soft friction of the screen, the particular cadence of bare feet on concrete. Livia walked with an intention that even her sleeping pad shuffle carried, each step landing with a quiet, deliberate authority. The sound of the French press being filled at the sink, which Livia always did before her own shower, letting the coffee steep while she washed. The brief, muffled sound of water running behind the bathroom door. Lyra made her tea. She wrapped her hands around the mug and breathed. She was fine. She had been telling herself this for 22 days, with the conviction of someone who understood that belief was sometimes infrastructural, that if you removed it, even provisionally, everything above it came down. The Halcyon Botanical Garden project was, objectively, the most significant commission of Lyra's career. She understood this. She held this knowledge carefully, the way you hold something both precious and slightly dangerous, aware that its weight could tip either into gratitude or into pressure depending on the hour and her blood sugar. The commission had come through the Pacific Northwest Botanical Society. Her letter of commendation had been the door, her portfolio had been the key, and it asked for something she had never been asked to do before. Not simply illustrate plants for a publication, but create a unified visual identity for an entire architectural space. The botanical illustration panels, the interpretive signage, the embedded artwork on the pavilion walls, all of it was to be hers. All of it was to exist in conversation with the architecture surrounding it. The architecture that Livia Knightwood was designing. Lyra had studied Livia's published work obsessively in the weeks before the project began, sitting at her kitchen table in her Ballard apartment with her laptop open and a glass of wine going warm beside her. She'd told herself this was professional preparation. She'd told herself this with the particular vehemence of someone who is lying to herself and knows it. Livia's architecture was remarkable. She had been remarkable at 23 when Lyra knew her, and 5 years in Paris working with some of the most demanding sustainable design firms in Europe had sharpened whatever had been raw and extraordinary in her into something precise and formidable. The buildings she designed breathed. That was the only word Lyra had been able to find for it, sitting alone in her apartment at 11 p.m., with the wine going warm. They breathed. The Knightwood Rave firm's signature integration of living systems into structural design. Green walls, rooftop ecosystems, interior light shafts that functioned as vertical gardens, created spaces that felt inhabited by something other than their human users. Inhabited by the slow, deliberate intelligence of growing things, which was why Lyra was here, which was why any of this made sense professionally, which did not explain why the Monstera Deliciosa on her drafting table had been the same stage of illustration for 6 days, because every time she sat down to complete the root system study she needed to begin the pavilion wall panels, she found herself unable to concentrate on anything except the precise distance between her corner of the loft and Livia's. You haven't touched the fern studies. Lyra's pen stopped moving. She had not heard Livia approach, which was unusual, because she had finally calibrated her peripheral awareness of Livia's movements over 3 weeks, the way prey animals develop an awareness of particular shadows. But Livia had come up on her blind side, emerging from the kitchen with her coffee mug and stopping just beyond the edge of Lyra's visible range, and now she was simply there. A presence with weight and warmth, and a voice that was still, after 5 years, low and precise and slightly accented in a way that Paris had deepened without replacing anything fundamental. I'm working on the Monstera root architecture, Lyra said to the paper. The fern studies come after the primary specimens. The timeline shows the ferns in this week's deliverables. The timeline shows the ferns as a suggestion. My process is sequential. A pause. Lyra heard the soft sound of Livia setting her coffee mug down, on the edge of the drafting table, near the upper right corner, because there was a small, clear space there, and Livia's instinct was always to find the nearest available surface and claim it with a casual certainty that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with the way she simply moved through space as though it already belonged to her. Your process is sequential, Livia repeated, not mocking. Processing, Lyra thought. Filing. Yes. And the root architecture of the Monstera is necessary before you can approach the ferns. The ferns and the Monstera will share wall space in the East Pavilion. I need to understand the visual relationship between their root systems before I can make decisions about scale and proximity. It's compositional logic. Another pause. Longer. That's actually quite good, Livia said, with the mild tone of someone giving credit they had not fully expected to give. Lyra's pen began to move again. I know. She heard Livia pick up her coffee mug. She heard her take a slow breath, the kind that preceded a decision. I need you to come look at something on the model, the East Pavilion light shaft. I've made a structural change that affects the wall panel dimensions. I need your eye on it before I submit the revision. Send me the updated drawings. I need your eye on the model, Lyra. The physical model. It's a spatial question. Lyra very carefully finished the line she was drawing. A lateral root, delicate and precise, branching off the primary structure in the exact angle she'd observed in the living specimen. She set her pen in its rest. She kept her eyes on the paper. Give me 10 minutes, she said. She took 14 minutes, because she needed 4 of them to sit very still and breathe in the way her therapist had taught her. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Box breathing. She'd learned it 2 years ago for reasons unrelated to Livia Knightwood, and she had since discovered that it worked equally well for anxiety, for the particular vertigo of standing at the edge of something enormous, and for the experience of being in a room with someone whose presence pressed against the inside of her ribcage like a thumb against a bruise. Livia was at the model table when Lyra crossed the floor. She was standing with her arms crossed, her head tilted at the slight angle she adopted when she was looking at something she was not quite satisfied with. She was wearing a charcoal linen shirt, with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. She always rolled her sleeves up by mid-morning, a gesture so habitual it barely registered as one. And her dark hair was pulled back with the kind of careless efficiency that Lyra knew, from history, was actually the result of considerable practice. Livia Knightwood did not do careless. She did the appearance of careless, which was a different and far more demanding discipline. She did not look up when Lyra stopped beside her. This was its own kind of relief. "Here," Livia said, indicating a point on the East Pavilion model with one finger. "I have widened the light shaft by 30 centimeters on the south side. It changes the fall of natural light on this wall." She traced a line along the model's interior. From a consistent, diffused spread to something more directional, more dramatic, but it compromises the flat light conditions your illustrations need. Lyra looked at the model. She studied the light shaft, the angle of the wall, the scale representation of the glazing. "By how much?" she asked. "Approximately 3 hours of direct light impact in high summer, 7 a.m. to 10. After 10, the diffusion returns." "That's manageable. Most of my pigments are light stable, but the backing material isn't. If you install UV filtering glazing on that shaft, the directional light becomes an asset rather than a problem." Livia was quiet for a moment. "The UV filtering reduces the passive heating benefit. By how much?" 12%. "Is that acceptable for the passive heating design?" "It's within tolerance." Livia's finger was still resting on the model wall. Her nail was short and unpolished. Her hands the hands of someone who worked with physical materials as well as digital ones. Lyra had noticed calluses she didn't remember. The directional light, with the UV filtering, could actually create something interesting for your panels. The movement across the wall through the morning. I was thinking the same thing. This was the part that was genuinely cruel, Lyra thought. Not the history between them, not the 5 years of distance, not the fact that Livia had left Seattle in August of the year they were 26, without a real explanation, and only a text message that said, "I have to go. I think you know that." The genuinely cruel part was that they were extraordinarily good at this, at the work, at the thinking together that happened when their expertise met at the edge of a shared problem. It had always been like this, even before the studio, even before the commission. In college, when Lyra was finishing her MFA, and Livia was doing her architectural residency, and they'd met at a gallery opening where someone had hung 3 of Lyra's illustrations next to a set of Livia's section drawings as a curatorial statement about the relationship between scientific documentation and structural design. They had stood in front of each other's work for an hour before they spoke. Then they had talked until the gallery closed, until the staff asked them to leave, until they were standing on a wet Seattle sidewalk at midnight, not quite ready to go in separate directions. That was the beginning. The beginning had been effortless, which was the thing about beginnings. You only understood their nature by looking back from the middle of everything they became. "I'll mark up the glazing specs tonight," Livia said. "If you can confirm the pigment and backing requirements by Thursday, I can have the revision submitted by end of week." "I'll have them to you by Wednesday," Lyra said. She took a step back from the model table. Livia's hand dropped from the model's wall. For one unguarded moment, neither of them moved, and the 22 feet between their workspaces felt like a fiction. They were standing 18 inches apart, close enough for Lyra to be aware, with a clarity that was almost physical pain, of the sandalwood that still, after everything, still, Livia wore. Then Lyra turned and walked back to her drafting table, and the distance was reinstated, and the morning continued. The rain arrived by afternoon. This was not unusual. Rain was Seattle's ambient condition, the weather equivalent of background noise. Present, consistent, mostly ignored unless it decided to mean something. Today, it decided to mean something. By 2 o'clock, the sky had dropped itself down over the city with the definitive authority of a curtain coming down between acts, and the rain was coming in sheets against the north windows, each gust sending long rivulets chasing each other down the glass. The quality of light in the loft changed. It went from its usual cool, even gray to something more dramatic, darker at the edges, more concentrated at the center, the windows themselves becoming the light source as everything outside them went dim and silver. It was, despite everything, beautiful. Lyra noticed this with the small, involuntary part of her that always noticed such things, regardless of whether she wanted it to. The part that was botanical illustrator before it was anything else. The part that saw light and immediately began calculating how to render it. She was working on the Monstera's aerial routes when the power flickered. Not a full outage, just a brief interruption. A stutter in the electrical current that sent the loft into 2 full seconds of darkness before the lights returned. In those 2 seconds, the only light was the rain-filtered gray from the windows, and the city below them disappeared into it completely. And Lyra was aware, with a sudden physical acuity, of every object in the room. The plants on her rolling cart, their leaves catching the pale window light. The glass domes over Livia's models glowing faintly. The ink in her pen, suspended above the paper. And across the room, the stillness of the woman at the drafting monitors, who had gone very quiet. The lights came back. The room reassembled itself. Lyra's pen returned to the paper. For a while, there was only the rain. She heard Livia push back from her desk at 4:15, the wheels of her chair on the concrete, the specific sound of someone standing up with a decision already made. Lyra registered this without lifting her eyes from the tendril study she was finishing. A delicate, spiraling growth emerging from the leaf axil, the kind of structural detail that took a precision she could only access when she had been working for several uninterrupted hours and had settled into something she thought of privately as the deep place. That state of concentrated attention where the work stopped being effortful and became something closer to listening. The footsteps crossed the room. They did not go to the kitchen. They did not go toward the bathroom or the small storage closet or the door. They came toward her, and Lyra's pen hand slowed, infinitesimally, without quite stopping. Livia stopped in front of her drafting table, not beside it, in front of it, which meant she was directly in Lyra's line of sight if Lyra looked up from the paper, which Lyra did not do. "The east elevation drawing is wrong," Livia said. Lyra kept her pen moving. "I haven't seen the east elevation. I sent it to you this morning. I haven't opened my emails since 8 a.m. A pause. "You haven't opened your emails. I was working." Lyra. The word had a quality she couldn't quite classify. Not impatience exactly, but something more like the sound of someone who has been practicing patience for a very long time and has just reached the end of their practice. "The east elevation affects your panel dimensions. The wall width changed. The specs I gave you Tuesday were wrong by 40 centimeters. Lyra's pen stopped. She looked at the tendril she'd just completed, counting its spirals without really seeing them. "I'll review it tonight," she said. Tonight. Livia was not moving. Lyra could see, at the very bottom of her peripheral vision, the lower hem of Livia's shirt, the tops of her hands resting on the edge of the drafting table, the way her weight had shifted slightly forward. Not aggressive. Present. "You'll review it tonight, and then tomorrow morning you'll send me a response, and then we'll have a conversation about it 2 days from now over email because you won't come. Look at the model with me." "I came to look at the model this morning." "You stood next to the model. You gave me a professional opinion, and you left. You didn't look at it the way you look at something you're actually engaging with." A pause. "You haven't looked at anything in this room the way you're actually engaging with it. In 3 weeks. Lyra felt the pen very carefully between her fingers. She thought about box breathing. She thought about the 47 ceiling tiles. She thought about the tendril she'd been drawing, its patient spiral, the way it reached toward anything it could find to hold on to. "The project is on schedule," she said. "My deliverables have been on time. The quality has been... I'm not talking about the project." The room went very quiet. The rain against the windows said everything it always said, and beneath it, nothing. Lyra put her pen in its rest. She looked at the paper. She had been doing an extraordinary job, she thought, with a bleakness that might have been funny under different circumstances. She had been doing such a thorough, methodical, professionally excellent job of not being here, of being only the work and the deadlines and the emails, of existing in this room for 22 days as a function rather than a person. And now, Livia was standing in front of her desk in the late afternoon light with the rain coming down outside, and she was using her low and precise voice to say, "I'm not talking about the project." And Lyra understood, with absolute clarity, that they had arrived at the edge of something she had been carefully navigating away from for 3 weeks. "Livia," she said. Her voice was very steady. She was proud of how steady it was. "We have a contract. We have a timeline. If we can keep things professional." "Things are professional." Livia leaned forward slightly, and now she was within the radius of the drafting table lamp, her face illuminated by the warm-toned light that Lyra used for close detail work. "They've been impeccably professional. That's the problem." "That can't be the problem. That's supposed to be the solution." "To what?" Lyra said nothing. "To what, Lyra?" "Softer now. Not gentle exactly. Livia was rarely soft in the sense of yielding, but with a quality of restraint, as though she was holding something in check, deliberately, the way you hold a door open against a wind that wants to close it. What are you solving for?" "The project," Lyra said. And even as she said it, she could hear how insufficient it was, how it fell short of the space it was trying to fill. "You haven't verified the fern panel dimensions with me in person. You haven't come to look at the West Corridor model, which affects your largest single piece. You answer my emails in 3-word responses at 6 a.m. We share this space for 10 hours a day, and you have been—" Livia paused, and something moved across her face that Lyra caught at the edge of her avoidance, something with weight in it. "You've been disappearing, every day, right in front of me." "I'm right here." "No." Livia's hand moved. She pressed her palm flat against the edge of the drafting table, not covering Lyra's drawing, but close. Close enough that Lyra was suddenly aware of the specific geography of that hand, the particular architecture of it, the way she had once known it well enough to recognize it in poor light. "You're not, and the project is suffering for it. We have a West Corridor consultation with the Halcyon board in 10 days, and I can't show them integrated work because we haven't integrated anything. We've been working in parallel in the same room and calling it collaboration." This was accurate. Lyra knew it was accurate. She had known it for 2 weeks, had filed it in the category of things she was aware of and could not address, the way you are aware of a structural issue in a building you've already moved into. "I can pull the West Corridor work together this week," she said. "I'll have preliminary compositions ready for your review by Friday." Lyra, her name, again, just her name, and the specific register Livia put it in when she was not going to let something go. "Stop." The word landed like a hand on a shoulder. Lyra's throat tightened. She looked at the paper. "The project is suffering," Livia said, "because you refuse to be in the same room as me. Not physically. You're physically here. But you won't look at me. You haven't looked at me since the first day. You look at everything in this room except me. And I've been—" Her voice changed, just slightly, a fraction of a degree from its usual precision, and the change was so small and so significant that Lyra felt it like a change in air pressure. "I've been trying to understand what I'm supposed to do with that." Silence. The rain was very loud. "The project," Livia said, after a moment, her voice quiet and direct, "is going to fail the board review if we go in there with disconnected work. That's a professional fact. I need you to engage with me on the West Corridor before Friday. I need your actual presence, not your email, not your deliverables. You." Then she moved. She came around the side of the drafting table, not to Lyra's left, not staying at a professional distance, but directly to her right, close enough that Lyra had to decide, in the space of one heartbeat, whether to turn her chair or hold still. She held still. Livia stopped beside her. She reached across and placed 2 fingers lightly on the corner of Lyra's current drawing, not touching the ink, just touching the paper's edge. And for a moment, neither of them moved. "Why don't you look me in the eyes?" The question was quiet. It came out differently than anything else she'd said. Without architecture, without the scaffolding of professional language, or the measured distance of someone presenting a complaint. It came out stripped down, asking what it was actually asking. And Lyra felt, with a precision she had been trying for 22 days to prevent, the exact place inside her chest where she had sealed something shut in the summer she was 26. The place she had built over so carefully and so thoroughly that she had almost convinced herself it was simply no longer there. Livia. Her voice was not quite steady anymore. "Please don't." "I'm not doing anything. I asked you a question. You know what you're asking." "I do," Livia said. "That's why I'm asking it." Lyra looked up. She had not intended to. The decision happened below the level of intention, in some region of her body that had apparently been waiting for a specific combination of rain and proximity, and the soft insistence of 2 fingers on the edge of a piece of paper. Her head came up and she looked, for the first time in 22 days, directly at Livia Knightwood's face. It was a face she had spent 5 years not looking at, except in the unguarded moments of sleep, except in the involuntary replays that arrived without invitation and departed without explanation, leaving her awake at 2 a.m. in her Ballard apartment, counting backward from 100 until her heart rate returned to something manageable. It was a face she had been in close proximity to for 22 days, while looking at everything around it with the dedicated focus of someone performing an elaborate trick. Look at the coffee mug, look at the model, look at the north windows, look at the paper, never at the face. And now she was looking at it, and it was. The 5 years were in it. She could see them, not as damage exactly, but as addition. The way a tree's rings are addition. There were new lines at the corners of Livia's eyes, faint and expressive. The lines of someone who had been in bright southern light and had spent years looking at technical drawings and has squinted productively at both. Her jaw was set with the same determination Lyra remembered, but it had deepened, become something more settled, less effortful, the determination of someone who had had time to make peace with the fact of their own will. Her dark eyes were looking directly at Lyra with an expression that Lyra was not. She was absolutely not going to name aloud, because naming it would make it real, and real was the thing she had been organizing her entire interior architecture to prevent. Her own eyes were filling. She could feel it, the physical process of it, involuntary and appalling, her body making its own declaration entirely without her consent. "Because," Lyra said. The word came out small and insufficient. Livia waited. She did not move back. She did not give Lyra the option of distance. "Because," Lyra said again, and her voice was breaking in a way she had not allowed in 5 years. Not since the August morning she'd sat in her apartment with Livia's text message on her phone and understood, slowly and completely, that the thing that had been the center of her world for 3 years had simply been removed from it, without a real goodbye, without a real reason, without anything she could hold on to or push against. "Because I can't look at you and keep this—" She stopped. She pressed her teeth together. "Keep this what?" Livia asked. The rain came down. "Managed," Lyra said. The word fell between them and settled. Livia made a sound. Not quite a breath, not quite a word. Something in between, something that contained, Lyra thought, a quality she had not expected. Not relief, not victory. Something more like grief and recognition. "You think it's managed?" Livia said. "What you've been doing for 3 weeks. Looking at everything except me. It was working. It was not working. Professionally. Not professionally. Not personally. In no dimension was it working, Lyra. Livia's voice was low now, controlled but only barely, with a roughness underneath the control that Lyra recognized from the few times in their history she had heard it, the voice Livia used when something was costing her. "Do you think I've been fine? Being in this room with you? Having you look at the north windows when you talk to me, having you answer every email at 6 a.m. so you don't have to speak to me in person, having you—" She stopped. A breath. "Having you treat me like I'm not here. I haven't been—" "You have. You've been treating me exactly the way you'd treat someone you wish weren't here. That's not—" Lyra's voice broke. She caught it. "That's not what it is. Then what is it?" And Lyra looked at her. She looked at her fully, with everything she had been withholding for 22 days and for 5 years before that, with all the accumulated weight of what it cost to be in the same room as a person who had been, for 3 years, the organizing principle of her interior life, and who had then been absent from it so completely that the absence itself had become a kind of presence, a shape in the room of her that she'd had to build her daily life around. "You left," she said. The words were quiet and final, and they contained everything. Livia's expression shifted. The precision of it gave way to something more exposed. "I know," she said. "You left and you didn't explain. You sent me a text message." Lyra's hands had gone very still in her lap. She was not crying. Her eyes were full, but she had not let it happen. She was holding it with both hands, the way you hold something that will make a terrible sound if it hits the floor. "And I spent the next year trying to figure out what I did. What the thing was that made you go. What was wrong with me? What was wrong with us? What was wrong with—" And then I figured out that there was no answer to that question. That you'd just gone. And I put it away. I put the whole thing away, and I built something that could function without it. Livia's jaw tightened. Not with coldness, with the particular tension of someone receiving something they know they deserve and cannot deflect. "And then you came back," Lyra said. "And Marcus put us in the same room, and I—" Her voice was unsteady now, past her control. "I thought I could do it. I thought it had been long enough, that I'd been thorough enough. I thought I could be in this room and look at you and feel professional, appropriate, whatever. But I can't look at you, Livia. I cannot look at you directly because every time I'm close to it, She stopped. She had to stop. Because what came next was the thing she had been most carefully not saying, the thing she had sealed away with the rest of it in the August when she was 26, the thing she had been protecting herself from the knowledge of for 22 days and 5 years, and however long it took for a person to stop loving someone they were not supposed to love anymore. "I imagine us starting over," she said. The words came out in a whisper, ragged and precise. "I imagine you staying, and I can't survive wanting that and watching you leave again, Livia. I can't. I have spent 5 years becoming someone who can function, and I need that. I need to be able to function, so I don't look at you. I don't look at you, and I answer emails at 6 a.m., and I count ceiling tiles in the morning, and that's how I stay." She pressed her lips together. "Intact," she finished. The silence that followed was different from the other silences of the last 22 days. It was not the tense, professional silence of two people working at a careful distance. It was the silence that comes after something true has been said, the quiet of a room in which the air has changed. Livia's 2 fingers on the edge of the drawing paper were very still. She had not moved through any of this, had only listened. And Lyra, now that she had finally looked at her and could not look away, watched something move through Livia's face in the way weather moves through a landscape. Visible, significant, changing the quality of the light. "I left," Livia said slowly, "because I was 26 years old and I was terrified." Lyra said nothing. Not of you. Not of what we were. of what I was going to do to it. Livia's voice was steady, but it had lost its architecture, its precision. She was speaking the way people speak when they have practiced a thing in private and are now saying it aloud to the actual person, and the actual person is more present than the rehearsal accounted for. I had the Paris offer, the Delacroix firm. You know what that was. You understand what that was. I know what it was. I was going to take it. I knew I was going to take it. And I had spent 6 months trying to figure out how to take it in a way that didn't... She stopped. Her jaw worked for a moment. In a way that didn't destroy you. And I couldn't find it. I couldn't find a way to say to you, I am going to choose this. I am going to put an ocean between us. I am going to go be the architect I need to be. And also I love you completely. And I need you to wait for something I can't make a promise about. I couldn't say all of that truthfully at once. So I sent a text and got on a plane, and I have spent 5 years. Her voice caught briefly, and was controlled again immediately. I have spent 5 years knowing exactly what kind of coward that made me. Lyra's hands were trembling slightly in her lap. She was aware of this with a strange detachment, as though observing herself from a short distance. You could have told me, she said, about Paris, about what you were trying to choose. I know what you would have done, Livia said. You would have said it was fine. You would have meant it when you said it. And then I would have gone, and it would not have been fine. And eventually you would have let me know that with silence, the way you let people know things you're too careful to say directly. She paused. I knew you too well to believe you, if you'd said it was fine. So I didn't give you the chance to say it. The rain was very present. The northern windows ran with it, silver and continuous. That's still a coward's reason, Lyra said. Yes, Livia agreed, simply, without defense. Another silence. But in this silence, Lyra was aware of something she had not been aware of for 22 days, or 5 years. The possibility that the thing she had sealed and built over and armored herself against was not the only story. That there were 2 stories, and she had only had access to one of them, and the one she had been living with. The story in which she was left, in which she was insufficient, in which something about her had made Livia choose distance, was not the complete account. It did not fix it. It did not undo 5 years of absence, or a text message, or the way she had spent the months after learning to compress herself into a smaller interior space. But it made the walls of it shift. It made the room of it larger, just slightly, large enough for another person's complicated, imperfect truth. You came back, Lyra said. She was not sure if it was a question, or an observation, or an accusation, or something else entirely. Yes. Marcus presented the commission to me, Livia said. I said yes before he finished the sentence. She looked at Lyra steadily. He mentioned your name at the end. The way he does, kind of as an afterthought, you know how he lists collaborators. He said your name, and I said yes. Lyra looked at her. I have been in Paris for 5 years, Livia said, being very good at my work. Very good. The firm was everything I thought it would be, and I am an excellent architect, and I made something of myself there that I needed to make. And I have been there for 5 years knowing exactly what I walked away from, not because the work wasn't worth it, but because I walked away from it badly, without fairness, without the conversation you deserved, and because... She stopped. A breath. Something deliberate in the breath, a steadying. Because a part of me knew, even at 26, even on the plane to Charles de Gaulle, that there was not going to be another person. Not another person like you. And I went anyway, and I built a career. And when Marcus said your name, I said yes. And then I came here and you wouldn't look at me, and I have been standing in this room for 3 weeks looking at the side of your face. The lamp on the drafting table was very warm, Outside, the rain was doing something complicated against the glass. A heavier gust, the sound of it changing register momentarily into something that almost resembled percussion. "Livia," Lyra said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight," Livia said quickly, and the quickness of it was the most unguarded thing Lyra had ever heard from her. I understand what I did. I understand what it cost. I'm not standing here expecting—" "Livia." Lyra's hand moved. She wasn't entirely sure she had chosen for it to move. It simply moved, from her lap to the edge of the drafting table, and her fingers rested beside Livia's, not quite touching. Livia went still. "I know you're not asking for forgiveness," Lyra said. "I know what you're asking for." A pause. "What am I asking for?" Lyra looked at her. She had been looking at her for several minutes now. It was extraordinary. The simplest thing, and the most extraordinary. The way you can spend a long time avoiding a thing, and then do it, and discover that your body already knew how. Her eyes were full, and had been full for some time, and she had stopped fighting it, which meant that she was probably a complete and unambiguous mess. Ink on her fingers and her hair in a clip that was certainly crooked, and tear-bright eyes in the drafting lamp's warm light. She looked like exactly what she was, a person who had been managing something enormous for a long time, and had just stopped managing it. "You're asking me if there's anything left," Lyra said. Livia's breath was very quiet. "Is there?" And Lyra thought about the 47 ceiling tiles. She thought about box breathing. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. She thought about the tendril she had been drawing an hour ago, the patient spiral of it reaching toward anything available to hold. She thought about the text message she had read 800 times in the first year, and perhaps a dozen times since, always in the blue light of 2 a.m., always alone. She thought about the way she had felt, standing 18 inches from Livia in front of the East Pavilion model, registering the sandalwood through a fierce and practiced act of will, and going back to her desk and counting things. She thought about what it meant that she still knew the sound of Livia's footsteps on concrete, well enough to distinguish them from any other footsteps in a building. She thought about what it meant that she had been illustrating a Monstera deliciosa for 6 days, a plant she knew completely, a plant she had drawn dozens of times, and had not been able to finish it. "Yes," she said, "there is." The word was the simplest word. The simplest, most insufficient, most complete word she had ever said, and she said it directly into Livia's eyes, without looking away, without finding something else to fix her gaze on, with all the defenselessness of a person who has finally stopped being careful. Livia's hand moved the remaining inch and covered Lyra's on the drafting table's edge. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The rain said what it always said. The drafting lamp held its circle of warm light. In the clay pot on the rolling cart, the Monstera's leaves moved almost imperceptibly in some small air current from the building's ventilation, the way living things always move, always continue their patient, indifferent, extraordinary process of being alive. "I'm not going back to Paris," Livia said. The commission was the reason I had. Seattle is the reason I came. That's not a small thing to say." "No, it isn't." Lyra turned her hand over, very slowly, beneath Livia's. Her fingers opened. Livia's fingers settled between them, and they held onto each other over the corner of a drafting table in a loft in Seattle's Soto district, with rain on the windows and 47 ceiling tiles above them, and 5 years of complicated, imperfect, completely unfinished history between them. "I'm going to need you to be patient with me," Lyra said. "I know. Not just about the forgiveness. I'm going to look at the floor sometimes, when it's too much. I'm going to answer an email instead of talking to you about something. I'm going to count things. I do that. I know. I've been watching you count things for 3 weeks. There was something in Livia's voice that was, just barely, almost a thing that wasn't grief. Almost at its edges, almost the distant geography of something that might one day be gently, carefully funny. The ceiling tiles. Lyra stared at her. You knew about the ceiling tiles. You move your lips. Just slightly. Lyra pressed her free hand over her eyes. I move my lips. It's not obvious. You'd have to be watching very carefully. Were you watching very carefully? The rain. Yes, Livia said. Lyra lowered her hand from her eyes. She looked at Livia and did not look away. And the looking was still difficult. It was probably always going to be a little difficult, the way certain true things are always a little difficult to hold directly. But it was also, underneath the difficulty, the most straightforward thing she had done in 5 years. Just looking. Just being here, in this room, with this particular woman who had left and come back, and who was standing with her hand in Lyra's, and who had been watching her count ceiling tiles with a care that Lyra was not, right now, going to examine too closely, because some things had to be approached slowly, and this was the beginning of a slow approach. The monstera is unfinished, Lyra said. Livia blinked at the shift. I know. I'm going to finish it tonight, and tomorrow I'll send you the complete pigment and backing specifications for the East Pavilion, and we can schedule a proper model review for the West Corridor before the board meeting. The work needs to be integrated, you're right about that. It's been compartmentalized and it shouldn't be. All right, Livia said. Not confused by the turn. She understood it, Lyra thought. She understood that this was also part of it, that the work was not separate from the rest of it, but woven through it, that they had met across each other's work, and the work was where the meeting happened. I'm going to need you to not be too good about this, Lyra added. If you're very understanding and very patient, and never once express frustration with any of it, I'm going to find it deeply suspicious. I can be irritating, Livia said. I have a great deal of experience with that. I know. I'll have strong opinions about the West Corridor panels. You always had strong opinions. They were good opinions. Some of them were good opinions. Livia's mouth curved. It was the most expression Lyra had seen on her face in 3 weeks, and it was exactly what she remembered, the particular asymmetry of it, the way the left side curved slightly ahead of the right, the way it transformed her face from formidable to simply human, simply someone who found things worth smiling about. You're going to argue with me about the panels, Livia said. Extensively, Lyra said. Good. Livia's thumb moved against Lyra's knuckles, once, briefly. I've missed arguing with you. The rain came down. The city outside the windows was all silver and deep gray, all water and reflected light. In the loft, the lamp held its small territory of warmth, and the plants breathed their slow botanical breath, and on the drafting table the unfinished monstera waited with the patience of something that had been growing steadily all this time, without any help from anyone, which is what living things do. Lyra was going to finish it tonight, and tomorrow morning she was not going to count the ceiling tiles. She was going to look at the rain instead,